We're so grateful tonight to have the Museum of Durham History, which is less than a block away, hosting this. And to start it off, I will say that the discussion tonight is mostly on the history of the park, not really what's going on right now. So to set the stage for that, think back to the late 1950s, early 1960s. North Carolina was still a pretty rural state. And I believe I saw a statistic somewhere that said that it was the fifth to the bottom of states per capita income. So here you have all this wonderful, beautiful, abundant land, fantastic educational institutions, a Governor Luther Hodges who's chomping at the bit to keep all those students who are coming in from out of state from leaving after they get their education here, and really wanted to put North Carolina on the map and collaborated with so many fabulous individuals to bring the Research Triangle Park to fruition. And that's where we'll start, talking about the land and the people and the institutions. David, would you like to kick it off?
Sure. Well, thanks for introduction, and also thanks to the museum for putting this together. It's great to have. I'm definitely at the kids table down here because we've got real superstars here, and although we have a lot of new people here in Durham, it's great to have a few people that have been around Durham for a long time. We're still here. We're not going anywhere. The reason I'm up here is my great uncle George Watts Hill was very instrumental in the first part of the park, and he was a Durham guy. And he was born in 1901, and so, late 50s, this is a perfect time for him to be involved in something new. His family, John Sprunt Hill, his dad, George W. Watts, his granddad, George W. Watts is a 20% shareholder in American Tobacco. His dad, John Sprunt Hill, started Central Carolina Bank, what was Durham Bank and Trust. So a lot of legacy industries, tobacco, textiles. Durham was a very different place. So Research Triangle Park was a very interesting, almost like a venture capital idea. There was a lot of risk. It was something completely new. It was not subject to the veto of his father. So I think that was very attractive to him. One of the most important things to start off the park, just like it is for any development, is water and sewer, and particularly a water line. And so when things started out, it was really a idea that Romeo Guest had, but they needed to get buy-in from folks around here. And so George Watts Hill was very well known in Durham. He'd been a city council person when he was 27, if you can imagine that, on the city council for 2 terms during the Depression. He was head of the finance committee, so he knew everybody in the city of Durham and all the constituents. So he was pressed to basically try to get a water line out to this area. And it was such an infancy idea. It was the Research Triangle Committee was the first group formed, and he was a part of that, along with several others from Raleigh and elsewhere, and these folks can certainly elaborate on that. But he was the Durham person, and originally the idea was there was going to be a lot of options on several thousands of acres of land, and it was going to be a for-profit business. Well, that didn't sit well with someone coming in and saying, remember, Research Triangle Park is way out. This is a very different Durham. You're not 10 minutes to the park. It's going to take you a while to get out to this area, and it's all pine trees. And you're asking me to do what? I'm going to invest in this Pinelands Corporation, and what is that exactly? So turning it into a nonprofit, eventually Research Triangle Committee becomes Research Triangle Institute. The park is formed with Research Triangle Foundation and a nonprofit, and it's much more palatable for people to realize this might be part of the greater good for Durham. And so he helped with the land assemblage and just trying to get things moving forward from the Durham perspective.
Romeo Guest was an architect from New England, and he saw an opportunity down here in North Carolina to build textile factories and design them. He also was a contractor. Interestingly enough, in 1974, we bought his company and ran it until we sold the Teer Company in 1980. Make a long story short, Romeo Guest was a visionary. He envisioned a science park to reverse the brain drain that's been mentioned. to give these 6,000 students at that time a place to go to work. And he's the one who put together the land options and later sold those options to the nonprofit. I think the number was $2 million. And from that, the land was bought, and working with the state and the Department of Transportation, the Research Triangle Park evolved. The roads were put in. The big thing was, and that's been mentioned, the city of Durham put in the water and sewer. And if they hadn't done that, the park would have been 10 years behind where it was. Since all of that, this would have been in the 60s, late 50s and 60s and early 70s, the park has just morphed. IBM announced coming here in 1965. Merce welcome, what year did they come? 65. The U.S. Forest Service relocated here, a local office, and things started to happen. And one thing led to another, and it's now become a science park, one of the most well-known parks in the world. And 55,000 employees, over 7,000 acres. 7,000 acres have now been acquired and are part of the park. It's not part of Durham, it's not part of Raleigh, it's not part of Chapel Hill. It's an island between all of those cities. And that's worked real well, took politics out of it. And John and I have worked, David's aware of, Ginny's aware of bringing here companies like GlaxoSmithKline. Y'all have heard of them. We brought them here in 72, wasn't it? No, 70. Early 80s, actually. And John designed their buildings, and I built their buildings. We did the same thing for IBM. We built John designed, and I built 4 buildings for IBM on what land is now being repurposed as RTP 3.0. It's the land between Davis Drive on the east and the Expressway on the west, and 54 on the south, and the Durham I-40 on the north. You know, you couldn't have written a better book, and we're going to talk about a book. There's been a book written that John and I have had a part with called Miracle Road. It's going to be published this year by Duke Press, and that's something y'all all look for. Give you all the information we're going to give you today, plus all the minutiae. And that book, it's going to be a nice book. It's going to have a lot of pictures, but it's going to memorialize the Research Triangle Park story, which is so important to not just our region, but all of North Carolina.
Well, let's go back a minute and talk about design and construction and how different it was back then. And companies could not build on more than 15% of the campuses or the land that they owned, and you all designed and built probably half of them. Tell us a little bit about that.
When you're in the park, you'll see it's a campus, and most people bought 50 acres or more, but they couldn't build. The footprint of the buildings could not exceed 15% of the land, and that's what's given it the campus look that it has even today. Now, the zoning was changed in 2025 to change that somewhat, and that's where the RTP 3.0 zoning came from. And so for the first time last year, housing was built in the park, and that's being built there near where we built the Governor's Inn in that area. 244 apartments have been built, but it's also allowed in the zoning. The new zoning allows apartments to be built in townhouses. So that's an important difference. There's also going to be in this new service center, you might call it, is going to be new offices, new laboratories, parking decks, hotel. There's going to be a nice Renaissance hotel there. And 3 of the 4 IBM buildings that I built are going to be there. We're keeping those. And the Research Triangle Foundation now has ownership of those buildings, and they're repurposing them, and they're leasing them as multi-tenant buildings. As far as the challenges that we had, actually I think John and I did our work during the golden years when it wasn't quite as complicated and it's hard to get things done as it is today. But there's a lot of people that made some major decisions. One was the county of Durham, who put the sewer plant out on 55 to provide the initial sewer capacity for the park. And the city of Durham, as I said, extended the water lines. A lot of leadership, a lot of thought. DOT over the years have done an unbelievable job on building the road infrastructure in the park. When I was in high school, Cornwallis Road was extended from Miami Boulevard over to 55 to connect everything. And also the governors. If you recall, the hotel that we built called the Governor's Inn, it's now been demolished the last couple of years. We named it the Governor's Inn because of the work that Governor Luther Hodges, Terry Sanford, and who was the other one?
Jim Hunt?
Not Jim Hunt, it was before his time.
We had Archie Davis with Wachovia.
One more governor involved, I can't think of his name. Terry Sanford. Those three. And they really pushed it along. And so from their involvement, we decided to name that hotel the Governor's Inn. And you might remember the lounge in the hotel, the bar, we named the Quorum after government and the quorum. You have to have a quorum, that type of thing. But it stood the test. It was there for 40 years and became one of the senior or places where most people met and did deals. In fact, we had names on the banquettes in the restaurant of the different companies that they organized in the Governor's Inn. Remember that, John? Anyway, we could sit here and tell you those kind of stories and run this thing out, but somebody else needs to talk.
Well, let John talk a little bit about the politics and some of the people involved from a political standpoint.
Thank you, Ginny. Thank all of you for being here. Thank the Museum of History. Robb mentioned the book, and the book is called Miracle Road, The Story of Research Triangle Park, and there's a flyer that Treat has out there. And Robb serves on the committee. Preston Lynn, who came in earlier, sitting in the audience, he served on the committee. I served on the committee. Others, Charles Hamner, any of you him, Bob Ingram's, unfortunately those two have passed, Bob Ingram and others who have had a participation. Alan Paul is the writer. I don't want to get carried away on the book, but if you're intrigued by these little stories and tidbits we're telling you tonight, the book is much more than a chronological history. It's about the people. It's the stories of the people who helped put the park together. And the flyer was developed for a fundraiser, and you're welcome to make a contribution of any magnitude you would want, but that's not the purpose for me bringing it tonight. It just was so, it's supposed to be, Duke Press is supposed to have it out in the fall. And if you're interested in that, I'm going to give a quick snippet to lead up to answering Ginny's question. You heard the name Romeo Guest. You heard Robb talk about Romeo Guest. Romeo Guest came up with this idea that we ought to do something in 1951, and he called it the Golden Triangle of Research. That was his name for it, and. He had an entrepreneurial spirit about him. He was a promoter in his spirit of always doing anything, and he tried to talk others into it. And Bill Lumsted was the governor in 1952. Bill Lumsted, for those who might not know, was from Durham. He was a Durham guy who was governor. Unfortunately, Bill Lumsted didn't any sooner get in office, and he had a heart attack, and basically he suffered for the next 2 years as a result of that heart attack, and Romeo Guest couldn't really get much time with Bill Lumsted to know where that might go, and so Luther Hodges was lieutenant governor. Luther Hodges became governor when Bill Lumsted died in 55 or somewhere thereabouts. I don't remember exactly, but So Luther Hodges was governor for 7 years, give or take 6, 7 years, which at that time a governor couldn't succeed themselves. So Luther Hodges was governor long enough to really make an impact. So Guest got with Luther Hodges, a lot of this I'm getting off what these guys did in the book, in 54, and then they put together the Research Triangle Council, which David referred to, which Watts Hill got involved with. And then they got Robert Haynes of the Haynes textile family, who Haynes had both connections with Wachovia Bank, which was the predecessor to what Wells Fargo is here in North Carolina. And then later they got Archie Davis, who was president of Wachovia Bank, to come in and help raise the money and put all that together. So pause for a moment. There's this guy, Romeo Guest from Greensboro, this guy, Robert Haynes from Winston-Salem, Archie Davis from Winston-Salem, Luther Hodges, I believe, grew up in Concord, North Carolina. By the way, Luther Hodges Jr. was on our book committee as well. None of them were from Durham, Raleigh, Chapel Hill. And here we have this thing here. So to me, that's an interesting tidbit in history. It was 1959, and at that time they'd put together enough. Governor Hodges gathered 600 civic leaders, business people, academics to announce the Research Triangle Park in 1959. And then the first announcement was a company called Chemstrand. Chemstrand was a Monsanto subsidiary, and I don't know how long Chemstrand lasted, but it was announced in 59 as well. But whatever, it stayed in the park. The building stayed in the park probably through somewhere the late 70s, early 80s. But as Robb mentioned, the real validation of the park was when IBM announced in 1964 it would come to the Research Triangle Park. Okay, so you go with this guy who had this notion in 51 up until the validation of 64. And so this thing didn't just happen overnight. Oh, yeah, let's go do this Research Triangle Park. Research Triangle Park came in part of what Romeo Guest was doing, and Hodges bringing in university people. And there was a fellow who ran the textile, I think it's called the Textile Research Institute or something of that nature at NC State. And he said, well, let's take these 3 universities, and he drew this thing and he put a little square in the middle of the triangle. And that's where this Research Triangle notion came out of. And to lead up to Ginny's question, and I apologize for that long dissertation, Durham was kind of fat, happy, and sassy in the 50s. Well, the tobacco was booming. You had,
We still are.
We are in a different way. But to David's comments, the Hill family had done so much in banking, had done so much home insurance agent company, insurance, what's Verizon today, General Telephone, had regional headquarters here, and so forth. And at least from a civic gathering or an organized, let's go make this park work, it was like, that park's pretty good, like David said, but it's out there. It's out there. So there was no resistance to the park. There just wasn't this initial engagement in the park as an organized community civic effort. Tonight, though, you're fortunate. You've heard David. Watts Hill was key to the Research Triangle Institute. The Research Triangle Institute was to mitigate the university's concerns about these corporations coming and abusing academic freedom. That's the summary of it. And he was
chair from 1959 to 1992. That's a lot of committee meetings. For those of you that have been on a board, that's a lot.
All right, the Teer family, which you heard Robb speak a little bit to, they came out, for those who were here at this time, and built this thing called the Governor's Inn. It wasn't anything but just throwing money away. The park wasn't going anywhere. It hadn't gotten up. It hadn't gotten any validation, and they kept putting money in it. And if you went out there in more recent years, before it was taken down for the hub project, it was very successful. And those of you who were around here, Bill Shore out here as an example, you knew the Governor's Inn was a place to be at lunchtime if you wanted to know what was going on in the park.
It was the place for when Duke Children's Classic was hosted in a very prominent celebrity golf tournament, and they actually had it at Crowsdale, and we were still running the country club, so my dad who was not a golfer, but we had to host all these people. Everyone went out to the Governor's Club, and that was the place. The celebrities with Sinatra, Perry Como, these were Buddy Hackett. You probably didn't want to stay there. He was not very PC, but he. But I mean, it was a really. There's no way to. It was a very different time. There weren't a lot of. There were 21C. There wasn't all these different hotels. Wash Duke. That was the place to go.
But thank goodness for the Teer family and Robb. The Teer family has probably done somewhere close to 2 million square feet in various forms of facilities in the park. Governor's Inn being one. The secondary IBM campus that Robb mentioned, which is now the Frontier, which the foundation runs. Glaxo, Glaxo came because Robb Teer put together a building that he owned that he would lease to them in case Glaxo did not succeed. Can you believe that? Not only did he do the first building, he did the second building, then he helped put the third building together. Put together buildings for Biogen. And I'm not going to get off on the architect side, but I was very privileged to work with the Teer family as an architect doing those various projects and putting them together. And they all were first class and everything the Teer family did. So from the Durham side, you had a Watts Hill that was engaged. You had a Dillard Teer, a Nello Teer. And then a Robb Teer who followed on. And then Robb helped recruit Glaxo, along with the Durham Chamber and others. And I got the tagline. We would fly once a week to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, to recruit the fellow who was running the deal then. And we met this guy, Joe Ravane, who was hired to be the CEO. And Joe Ravane came, and Bill over here nodding, it was just a prince of a fellow, sharp as a tack. And Joe Ravane required all of his senior executives to live in Durham. Charlie Sanders, Art Pappas, Bob England, Bill Shore already lived in Durham. Anyway, and Joe lived. He led the way because he felt like Durham offered the opportunity for that corporate engagement on the part of Glaxo. So, anyway. Great projects. The Teer family, in its investment in the hard real estate people, did a great job, and that's probably more than you wanted me to say, Ginny.
No, that's great. Let's talk a little bit about Durham benefiting from so much of the park, 70% of the park being in Durham County, and the efforts for annexation, and people like Webb Gully and Kenneth Royal and folks like that participated in everything that was going on over the years. You want to tell some stories about that?
Well, I'll defer to these guys on some of the annexation, but certainly for Durham, I mean, you saw this was an engine of growth. It was leaving the legacy agrarian, commerce that we talked about earlier in the meeting, and so. I think for Durham, it was a great time to embrace some of these new companies. I know that there was another company that joined the park very early on called Astra Corp, and they did not. They needed a $50,000 line of credit. This was in '58, and they went to Wachovia, and Wachovia was like, "We don't know you. We're not going to do that." And so George Watts Hill had to sign off on the note personally to have the. I mean, who would do that? And I think also him trying to go out where some of the, it wasn't like the Research Triangle Foundation was awash in a lot of cash to start off, and there were options that were expiring. So sometimes he would go and purchase the land and then sell it back to the foundation at whatever cost he had bought the land. Where the EPA building is located, that was one of those tracts. So he knew that this down the road was going to be good for this area and for Durham. But the elected officials also knew, wow, this area out here might be good for Durham too to annex. So there was a big push when Webb Gully was mayor to try and annex the park, and Ken Royal, who was the representative at that time, he kind of quashed that and made, wanted to keep the independence of the park, which in retrospect probably was important for the park at that time. But I defer to you all to really comment on that more.
Yeah, that was a big deal, that trying to annex the park into Durham would have really messed up the feng shui of the park. I was against it from the very beginning, and it never happened. And it was the best thing for Durham and North Carolina, keeping it independent. And it's not like it was not part. It's still partly in Durham County, still partly in Wake County. The companies that are in the Durham County Park pay Durham County taxes. They pay for their water and sewer. It's not a free road. It's just the governance didn't change. The governance stays with the Research Triangle Foundation, and that's been part of the success. It made it more nimble and more decisive. And as these companies came into being, they could get quick decisions on things. They still had to follow the zoning laws and zoning codes, but it just was better not to annex the park. Kenneth Royal has been mentioned. He did a lot of good things for us. Kenneth helped. I had the opportunity to try to get we didn't have any ambulances at the park back in the day. And so we did set up what was called the Research Triangle Service and Production District, which encompassed the whole park. Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Research Triangle Park Service and Production District was decided on. And that we set up a ambulance service up in Bethesda, and a fire department's there now too. But all of that was with the help of Kenneth Royal, who helped get that legislation passed. And that's in existence today. And the importance of that district is that it does allow the park to tax all the owners up to 10 cents per $100 valuation to provide for amenities in the park. And if you've been to the park, you see the jogging trails that are there. That's all paid for with this Service and Production District tax. And we have tennis courts out there. Landscaping, all the roadside landscaping from the Durham part of the expressway through the park, down all the main streets, all that's paid for. And that's been going on now for 30 or 40 years. And so that made a big difference. All these little things have been done over the years to enhance and to make the park look better and to attract more businesses. I've been involved for 50 years. In fact, John and I were in high school over here at Durham at Carr Junior High when it was announced. And I never thought we'd be involved as much as we were. We have been. Anyway, if you read this book we're putting out, which I recommend you, you'll see how much, not only did the park help the Durham economy, but it helped the Triangle economy and the state of North Carolina economy. And one quick thing I want to say is biotechnology, which Biogen, one of our customers, is involved in, KBI Biopharma. All of that has really mushroomed, and North Carolina now is a star in biotechnology. I think there's 10 biotechnology firms in North Carolina, in Durham County. And it's just so many hidden stories out there, and hidden stories of success and hidden stories for the future. All right.
To footnote on the give or take 75% of the 7,200 acres are in Durham County of the park. And then if you look at how the park started developing, most of the development in the initial, 15 years, including IBM was in the park. Glaxo was in Durham County of the park. Glaxo was in Durham County portion of the park. The Service Center, the Governor's Inn, And so it was all in Durham. The bulk of it was in Durham County because 3/4 of the land in the Research Triangle Park was in Durham County. The other 25% in rough numbers was in Wake County. And Durham's sitting here saying, huh?
If you don't learn anything here with 3 developers and 1 architect, putting water and sewer in is key to anything. You cannot build anything.
So and then you'd say it's natural, and so Mayor Gully at that time said, well, how do we increase Durham's revenues? We go annex the park. Well, that went over like a lead balloon if you were in the park. And Kenneth Royal, who they mentioned, was a very influential senator in the state Senate, and he stood up on behalf of the park, and as Robb was elaborating on, put in legislation that said if you've got this much acreage and you're doing this scientific work, et cetera, they never called it Research Triangle Park. The statute doesn't. And that statute's still in place today. The park cannot be annexed.
Well, I think now we have lots of other stories, I'm sure, but I think the time is short, and we wanted to give you all the opportunity to ask some questions of things we maybe didn't address. So,
hi, I'm Sierra, and Robb, you had this is very strange talking to you. You had just mentioned hidden stories, and it made me wonder, are there anything in the footprints of the buildings that you contributed to, or the walls that anything that are stashed away there? You might know some have been demolished over time, but was there anything that, interesting put in the walls or foundations or anything?
No.
This has been absolutely wonderful tonight, listening to you talk. I love it. I do have a question for you, but I'm going to have a quick story, though. Terry Sanford, who was mentioned briefly, was running for governor. 1960, had a secret meeting at the College Inn in Raleigh with Robert Kennedy. And they kept it secret for a number of weeks. And then Terry Sanford shocked the political world when he went to Los Angeles and seconded the nomination for a Yankee Catholic for president. And he got death threats for endorsing Kennedy for president. And his pastor in Raleigh rescinded his invitation to speak at church right before the election because he endorsed a Catholic for president. And then he kept in touch with the Kennedy White House, the Johnson White House, and PBS documentary about Terry Sanford. His last day in office, he announced that the National Institutes of Health was coming to the park. And just to put that in perspective, that today their budget is over $1 billion, which is twice the budget of the city of Durham. So IBM was huge, 20,000 employees, but the first major organization, 6 weeks earlier to announce, was Terry Sanford and the National Institutes of Health, NIEHS.
So I'm not going to tell you the story in this book I was telling you about earlier, but it's a great story because Terry Sanford was a governor that was governor when IBM was recruited and announced. Right. And the recruitment of IBM went on for 7 years. But there's a great story in the book about, and I don't recall the name of the CEO of IBM at that time, but some aide came in and Sanford was tied up on something and said, so-and-so's on the phone with IBM, do you want me to get him to call back or whatever? And Sanford just about killed the aide, saying, get that call put through right now to my phone on the desk.
Why was the city of Durham reluctant to give water to the park?
I think from my research, it seems that the really started at first being a for-profit entity and endeavor, and that just took a very long period of time. They had a meeting with Durham leadership and Durham business leaders to say, this is coming and we're going to need to raise some money for a water line, and that went over like a lead balloon, and so my Uncle Watts had to go back, and they then did decide, really at R.J. Davis's Heist has to go ahead and start making this a nonprofit, and then that made it easier, but it still took a long time, and that's why Watts Hill was relied upon to go through the City of Durham contacts to start getting the water line out there. There still was a lot of pushback, but that really got things going, at least in the first corporations that were coming in.
And I might add, I think that water line was also part of the water line that was extended by Durham to the Raleigh-Durham Airport. So Durham played a key part in the park and the airport.
That was what I was getting ready to ask Rob. Can you speak a little bit about the airport and the parallel structure? You were on that airport authority for years and years and years.
Susan, let me add one thing. Durham's water supply, the forethought in putting water supply for Durham came out of the 1920s. And Durham's water, I'm not saying there aren't some challenges today, but Durham's been very blessed with good leadership on providing us good quality water. And Durham, I don't want to say they had an abundance, but Durham was able to step up thanks to what Mr. Hill did. Okay, now you got Rob really going because you want to talk about the airport.
The park would not be here without the airport. I can tell you that. None of the people I ever recruited, or John, or any of us, would come here about the second. It wasn't the first question they asked us. They asked the second question, what can you do, what do you have, or what will you do for the airport? And as you see, the airport has evolved into one of the number one airports, the fifth airport in the United States, as far as passengers and services. And y'all might recall my daddy was on the airport authority for 31 years. And I was on it for 22 years. Together we served 53 years on that airport authority. But it's that kind of leadership, not just us, but a lot of people that developed that airport. John Brantley was manager of the airport for 34 years. He really brought us into the golden age. And then Mike Langdeth, who I was involved with hiring in 2010, has taken us to the next level. And right now they're spending $2.3 billion to expand Terminal 2. We just opened in 2008. So the airport is the single most important thing for entrepreneurial development and growth in Durham County. In Durham and Lake County. Does that answer your question?
We have a mic over here, sir.
Hi, I'm Durham County Commissioner Michelle Burton, and I just want to say that I was very honored to be a part of the Board of Commissioners when we took the vote on November 24th to change the zoning of Research Triangle Park. I'm very grateful that RTP, the majority of RTP, 78% is in Durham County because it's such a big economic engine for our county and for our state. So I just wanted to put that out there. But I do have a question because I always wondered this. Who is T.W. Alexander and who is Davis?
T.W. Alexander was a businessman in Raleigh, wasn't he?
She stumped the chump on that one.
Yeah, I think he was a businessman from Raleigh. I don't remember what he did, but I knew him. And he was a leader. He was on the Research Triangle Foundation board. And I knew him, met him, worked with him for a while. A lot of leaders in this whole thing we're talking about today. Unfortunately, most of them have passed on. And the senior leaders left are very thin. There's very few of us anymore. Does that answer your question?
And Davis.
Who?
Davis.
Archie Davis was president of Wachovia Bank. He carried a big stick. And he was the first chairman.
Raised the money to buy the land.
Right. He was very influential, like Mr. Hill, and helped arrange the money to buy the options along with Mr. Hill, and he was very involved. He was probably the most decisive senior member of the board over the years.
That's a great question because there are a lot of roads out in the park that are named after individuals who participated in the organization and creation.
All the roads and streets we named
Right.
after
Bill
somebody.
Little from UNC Chapel Hill was a professor. Little Drive.
Here, we've got Got another question here.
Hi, good evening. I'm Ruth Zhao, and it's interesting to me to see the history behind RTP. We've lived in the Boston area where you know that, you've got real heavy hitters up the East Coast between the Boston area off of 128. Then you've got RTP, and then we also were living in California, Palo Alto. And they're very different cultures around all these different research parks. And I'm wondering if you could sort of address it as to nothing happens in a vacuum. So I'm sure everybody has eyes on all these other places that are evolving over, the past several decades. And I'm curious to see how you sort of place yourself as you look around this country and sort of try to be the next better generation of research.
Quality of life is a big deal. And apparently people like it because they're moving into Raleigh-Durham and the Piedmont in droves. The universities, educational opportunities, numerous things, just the culture of the area. It's different from the 128, Palo Alto, Austin. They're all different. They all have their own cultures. That's what I would say, the quality of life.
Ruth, I think in the early days, and it seems more commonplace today, you took academia, and academia was Chapel Hill, it was Duke, it was NC State. You took it collectively. Bill Friday was very instrumental in bringing that together. And then you took corporations, you took the Haynes, the textile, you took the Wachovias, the money, you took the Central Carolina Durham Bank and Trust, Central Carolina Bank. So there was the business side of it, and then there was the government side with the governors leading the way. And the legislature did some funding as well in the early days. And so it was this academia, corporate industry, and government coming together. And while today that seems a more natural phenomena, it wasn't a natural phenomenon then. In fact, the foundation, I don't recall exactly what year, but somewhere in the 80s, the Prime Minister of Japan asked him to come to Japan. I got to be a part of that group to tell the Japanese, how did you do this? The other thing was it was a hard physical entity. So you'd say Silicon Valley, but what are the boundaries of Silicon Valley? You'd say Cambridge. You'd say, Route 128. But, so you know what Route 128 is, but what are the boundaries up there? And you'd say today, the triangle, this research triangle, what we all talk about, we live in the triangle. All of us live in the triangle now. And so there's this whole thing that's gotten larger. But I think the initial foundation to your question was, and the Research Triangle Institute, which David, it was so key in bringing that research to bear in those early days. And I think that was the foundation.
I think also that, one difference in Durham now is that we don't have a corporate headquarters here. Central Carolina Bank's not here. It's through 6 different renditions. It's Truist, maybe, if you want to say it. And I can go out the door here on the way back to my car and see Google, but I don't care if they have 5,000 people here or Apple. They're not headquartered here, and that's a difference. And we've talked about this. I know the funding community, we have a family foundation. I see Mimi there with Biddle Foundation. That's something that's very tough for Durham moving forward, not having those corporate headquarters right here. And that was different. You had a very unique public, private, governmental, and corporate leadership partnership that was so critical in the late 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and now some of we have a different economy now in Durham, so it's that's a bit of a challenge moving forward. Yeah.
And let me say one quick. I think one other point about the location is the Research Triangle Park is a fixed entity, 7,000 acres. It has fixed boundaries. And that's important to these companies. They feel comfortable in the park. It's not, like John said, Route 128 or Austin. And also at the airport. The airport is 7,000 acres. The visionary people with CBA and the people that set Durham Airport in the late 30s and early 40s, made the decision to buy enough land so that we could do what we're doing out there now, building a third runway and expand the terminals and have plenty of room to build a quality airport and expand without having to go through zoning and annexation and all that kind of thing. So those are important in these decisions.
We've got one more over here.
Hi, my name is Tina, and I came out to RTP in 1991, fresh out of college, and just absolutely was starstruck with everything out here. Loved to ride around and look at the different buildings, and when people would come to town, I'd bring them out and show them and everything, and that has never left me. And it has seemed that the 15% rule has changed other than for the hub. Is that true? I feel like I'm seeing a lot more buildings than I ever thought I would with that 15%.
Changed last year.
And what did it change to?
It's an overall encompassing zone called Research Triangle Part 3.0. And that's about all I can tell you. It's very complex, involves zoning change for the park. It allows some housing for the first time, things like that. But there's a handout which we copied for you out in the lobby, which explains it.
The short of it, the short answer is it has already had some changes. Most of those are on the setbacks. The setbacks are not as great, which means that you can apply the impervious surface rule to a larger area of land. But that's one, as Robb mentioned, and we don't have enough time this evening, the foundation has worked with Durham County and Wake County on implementing what they call RTP 3.0, which is the intent is to develop more of a live, work, and play with housing and retail, and there are various classifications in the proposed 3.0 that you would go into for zoning that would affect what the density was on the piece of land. So that's a short version, but it is very complicated, and I'm not sure I'm thrilled about it, but I've been in the thick of that. But anyway, so I could bore you to tears for the rest of the night.
John, don't bore us. Hey, coming in from Glaxo, I heard stories about other areas of the country that the park was competing against. And I know you and Robb and other people had gone down to Fort Lauderdale. What other parts of the country are we actually head-to-head competing against for these biotech companies and pharma companies today now?
There's San Francisco, there's San Diego, there's RTP, there's Cambridge, and there's the greater Maryland area. Austin is certainly a competitor today. Houston is coming up and getting attention. I don't know that it's a direct competitor today. North Carolina, this is bigger than your question, but it impacts the park. North Carolina's gotten tagged as a pharmaceutical, life sciences, biologics manufacturing state. That's why there's a TBJ article today on Holly Springs, the Amgen, the Fuji Diosynths, and so forth. North Carolina has a just incredible community college system, which, by the way, got started by Hodges under some different name, knowing that we were doing the park. Incredible research universities, Research One universities, and other secondary universities, so to speak, not Research One. And we've got an incredible workforce in a non-union situation and quality of life. So the park is still prime. But I would say Austin, San Diego, Cambridge to a lesser extent than it might have been several years ago, just because of the taxation and the cost of living.
We're going to take one more question, which is over here, and then Patrick will close us out.
How did you get all the land? How did you get the land? What was it like to acquire 7,000?
Well, they started out with Romeo Guest with the idea of we would like to maybe start initially with 4,000 acres, and then that grew to 7,000 acres. And so they went out and optioned land. So they didn't immediately go buy 7,000 acres because that was going to be cost prohibitive. But they went out and optioned a lot of that land. And even though they optioned off a lot of it, there was always the next, like any good developer, the next piece you want is next door to you. And so they would then, if they didn't have the money, they would go and either talk to my Uncle Watts or they talk to others to raise money. And can you personally get that under option and then sell it back to the foundation at another time? So that was the struggle. It was. Yeah, pine trees and nothing.
And as they sold a piece of land to somebody, they'd take that money and buy some more land. And that's how they morphed it to 7,000 acres. And there's still, about 2,000 acres left right now?
In the park?
Yeah.
The park in simple terms, is built out. But it's not totally 7,200 acres covered, because some of that acreage, either through stream bed buffers or other restrictions, or it's like an office building, which these two guys know more about than I do. You might lease out 92% of it, but there's 8% that's in different pieces because of how you had to arrange the other leases. So, but in general terms, it's built out, and one of the transitions that's going on today is the big, large campus, the IBM campus, the former Glaxo campus. Corporations aren't going to the big campus real estate anymore. So that's part of the transition that's going on.
The park gave 500 acres to the government where EPA and NHS are. And they're in the, southwestern part of the park. And they're two of the biggest employers and biggest campuses out there. We haven't mentioned them at all, but the federal government has been a big part. But selling land and then buying some more land was their model. And that's how it morphed to 7,000 acres. Now, they're not doing that anymore. But as John says, especially been built out. Plus, there are pieces of property like Apple has an option on a piece of land that runs along the lake in the southern part of the park. Several hundred acres that they're going to build on. They just said recently, maybe in another couple of years. But that is spoken for, but nothing's built on it. So there's a lot of places like that out there too.
Well, it sounds like we are going to wrap up. I think Patrick's going to lead us out. Thank you, gentlemen and lady.
Yes, another round of applause, please. I want to thank the panelists. I want to thank you all. I want to give a special shout out to our elected officials like Commissioner Burton and our other board members who are here. Thank you so much for coming. I hope your stomachs aren't growling because we do have refreshments outside. So please, and the panelists will hopefully still stick around. So if we didn't get to your question, I'm sorry, but maybe you can ask them outside. So please, thank you so much for coming.